Hello, and welcome to the Intermediate GMing lecture series. Today's topic is choosing the right system for your games. What is this lecture series? As this is the first of the lecture series, allow me to clarify what the purpose of this series is. Firstly, I've discovered in my time GMing that the availability of beginner GM info is plentiful. There are plenty of wonderful guides out there in order to get somebody from no experience GMing to becoming a GM. Additionally, there is plenty of opportunity out on the internet in YouTube videos and podcasts to see really amazing expert DMs at work. However, finding the way to bridge the gap between beginner and expert can often be pretty challenging, and I find that the actual material out there on the internet is not adequate to really cover many of the topics that I wish to discuss in this lecture series. So I created this lecture series. Another question you may have is, who am I? What authority do I have to be presenting these topics? My name is Sterling. You can call me a Scruff McGruffin. That's where I am on most of the internet. You can find me on Twitter at CastRoomExile, and you can simply call me Scruff for short. I've been GMing tabletop since around 2011, and I have actually been playing tabletop games in some form or another since 2005. My most notable systems that I have experience with are D&D 3.5 and forward, as well as Pathfinder, Star Wars Edge of the Empire, and Dread. These are my wheelhouse, and while these aren't the only systems I am familiar with, these are the ones that I can speak with the most authority on. I will obviously be doing my research more thoroughly on the systems that I talk about that are not ones that I have direct experience with. So, let's dig into today's topic. How do you choose the right system for your game? Now, the first question that many of you may have is, why not just stick with D&D? It's a well-known system, it has wide support, it is one of the most popular for a reason. It's a wonderful, powerful system that fits for almost all of your fantasy role-playing needs. Why would you have to consider something else? Well, there are many aspects to why one would choose a different RPG. Dungeons & Dragons is one of the most expensive tabletop RPGs, and I know that I have been a starving college student before, and the cost and availability of the rulebooks has often been quite a hindrance, as well as when it comes to any minifigs I may want to purchase, or dice that I may need to collect for myself or my players, and even just getting tiles or setting up a marker board for the game in order to play on can often be a challenge. Many other systems do not have this level of cost prohibitiveness to them. Additionally, there are many other reasons. There is role-playing, combat, and crunch. These are three major aspects that really, the ratio that you want from each of these will severely determine how much enjoyment you get out of an RPG and how it is played. Dungeons & Dragons has a pretty good balance of roleplay, combat, and crunch. Crunch being, to define that term, the idea of numbers being things that you tweak and making sure that you take into account many different factors in character creation. For example, making meaningful numeric decisions on your character sheet is a good, solid definition for crunch. A compelling theme is something that many people find D&D to be lacking. Oftentimes, people find much more enjoyment out of modern day themed tabletop RPGs, things that maybe have a horror theme to them, possibly futuristic ones that are cyberpunk, for example, like Shadowrun or the titular Cyberpunk series. And additionally, just getting that experience from trying out other systems will ultimately make you a better GM in whatever system you play the most. And finally, we want to make sure that if there is a game out there that's perfect for you, that you are not missing out on it. You may find your new favorite game just by trying out new ones. So, when we look at the tabletop RPG systems that are out there, there are a lot. I will not sugarcoat it for you. Digging through all of these is going to take you a long time. However, there are lots of great resources out there in order to find new ones, but how do you find out what's right for you? How do you even start to choose between all of these systems? Well, there are many factors to consider, and these are the ones that I want to look at today. Theme, with the proper balance of roleplay in your system, the cost to actually play this role-playing system, the availability of playing online, how easy it is to learn, how many options players have when creating a character, how lethal is this system, how long do you expect to be playing this system, whether it be one-shots versus campaigns, or 2-hour sessions versus 8-hour sessions. Is this a system that requires a specific setting? And finally, what third-party content is out there? So to start, let's look at theme. The biggest question you want to ask when you're looking at the theme for the RPG that you are interested in playing is this theme engaging? Not only is it engaging for you, but is it engaging for your players, the people that you are playing with? Does it facilitate good characters being created? Is there enough to draw from that players who like having a lot of lore and world backstory can pull stuff from that in order to create a unique character? Or does the system allow the flexibility that your players want in their character creation? Does the system itself, the setting, the theme, does it all make the players come up with interesting character ideas? Does it make them fun? And are there uncomfortable aspects to this theme? If your players aren't a big fan of horror, perhaps you wish to avoid Call of Cthulhu. It's a very heavy horror theme setting, and there's a lot that comes with that maybe you may not have players comfortable with. What is the roleplay balance that you are looking for in your RPG? How expressive are your players? Do your players need the mechanics to help them roleplay? An obvious example of this that's very straightforward is, does the game allow for experience to be gained from proper roleplaying? Does the system require them to have backstories like in 5th edition that are wrapped into the character creation? Does the system clash with your players' desire to simply have a strong dungeon crawl? Some players may not be interested at all in the actual backstories and characters that they create as long as they are interesting to play mechanically. Is that something that your system allows? And finally, does this game system reward roleplay implicitly? A solid example of this is in Star Wars Edge of the Empire. During character creation, you basically create a certain amount of obligation for your character. The obligation that you get is basically how likely it is that different aspects of the character's backstory come up and interfere with an individual session. Now, the more obligation you take on at character creation, the more experience that you have in order to work with during that character creation. Cost is a huge factor for many people when it comes to considering an RPG. 5th edition has some rather expensive core rulebooks. It has the Player's Handbook, Dungeon Master's Guide, and Monster Manual, which all require a $50 purchase for a physical book. Obviously, you can get them on sale, but that's the baseline price that you are paying. Additionally, everybody needs a set of dice, unless you want to be real patient and pass them around. And then finally, if you want to play remotely, or if you want to have your players have access to all of the manuals and books that you have purchased remotely, then you are going to need a D&D Beyond Master Tier subscription for your party, which is $55 per year. And that, again, only gives them access to the books that you have purchased digitally. So you will also need to purchase any books that you are interested in having on the system as well, in order to give them access when you're not in session. When we compare that to other systems, you can see that there are many more cheap options out there in the RPG world. For example, Pathfinder is one that costs $0. You literally just need to purchase dice, and even then you can just use a random number generator of some sort if you're really, really on a shoestring budget. But to access the wiki with every single piece of content to create characters, have the monsters you need, all the systems in place, that cost $0 to access. You can purchase physical copies of these books, but that is unnecessary to play. Dread is a system that has one core rulebook, and it is $12, and it's pretty thin. And so you just need that and a Jenga tower in order to play Dread. Dread you just buy on the website of the guy who actually created the game, and I'm pretty sure he's just got a few boxes of this book in his basement that he just ships you out one when you purchase it. It's dirt cheap for an RPG that actually requires a physical book to play. And then finally, among the ones that I want to look at is Shadowrun. Shadowrun is a very complex system, and the entire core rulebook that you can get for 5th edition in PDF form is $20. Obviously, that's a PDF and not a physical book, but that's basically all you need to play. So cost is definitely something you want to keep in mind, because it's not only the cost for you, it is also the cost for your players. And how much flexibility you have in that can often determine what systems work best for you and your players. One other thing to think about is online gaming. Does your system have Roll20 support? Roll20 is a fantastic online gaming platform that I've used quite a bit, that allows for people to set up character sheets and manage their tokens on a map and track a bunch of stuff during combat, and it allows tracking things remotely for online gaming. Really, really smooth and streamlined compared to anything before it functionally. There are other systems as well, but Roll20 is definitely the most famous, and Roll20 has a lot of built-in systems for Pathfinder and Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition that make sure that you can really have everything integrated into the system. If that's something you want, then there's a lot of systems out there that aren't supported by Roll20 that you will need to find other ways to have that sort of integration. Additionally, is your system theater of the mind friendly? If you're dealing with a lot of miniatures on boards, if you're dealing with a lot of status effects that you need to track, then it's not going to be very friendly if everybody is just theater of the mind playing. Obviously, this also is affected by how exactly you are running the system, but that's something to keep in mind for if you are playing online. And the final factor I want to talk about for playing online is, does this system even work remotely? Dread is a system that I've mentioned before, and all that Dread needs to play is a few sheets of paper and a Jenga tower. However, the Jenga tower is shared by the entire party, so it doesn't really work remotely unless you can have the Dungeon Master remote and then everybody else in one room in order to pull tiles from the Jenga tower. Sure, you could play it via Tabletop Simulator, for example, but that's not quite the same, and it's not going to be exactly what the ideal case for this game is. Next factor I want to look at is ease of learning. Ease of learning for a system is not only how easy it is for you to learn the system, but also how easy is it for your players to learn the system. How intuitive is it? Shadowrun has a massive character sheet with 1 million statistics, and it is not very intuitive. There's lots of slang and jargon from the setting itself that makes it onto the character sheet, that makes it really hard for new players to learn. But at the same time, that shouldn't be something that prevents you from playing if that is something that you are interested in. If you and your party are all interested in Shadowrun, you can definitely make that work. It is just something you want to keep in mind if that's something that you expect your players are not going to be up for. And finally, one thing that I want to express is I've found that GMing does not mean that you need to have all the answers for every question that comes up in game. You just need to be able to find the answers to those questions. So, the way that I have found works best is every campaign that I'm in, I make sure that one person knows the rules very, very well. It doesn't need to be the GM. It helps if it's the GM. But as long as there's one person in the party that knows the rules very well, or at least can find out where the answers are very easily, then you're going to be fine. What options for character creation does this system have? How expressive are the players that you're going to be playing with? Do they want a lot of options? And what kind of options do you really want? So there are a few different ways to have a lot of options for your character development and character creation. One way to look at it is Pathfinder's options. Pathfinder is a system where there's 1 million different options for races and classes, and there's special combination bonuses for each, and you get your choice of millions of feats, it feels like. You can scroll through the feat tree for hours. But all of these choices functionally work numerically. These are added to the crunch of your character sheet. There are different bonuses that you get here and there. Whereas if you look at something like Dread, Dread has entirely narrative representations of your characters. So, if your players are looking for something that allows them to express their characters with numbers, you're going to be looking for something that's crunchier, but still has many options. If your characters really want to express something unique via more narrative means, then something closer to Dread may be more interesting to them, so that they don't have to dig through piles of feats and equipment options. How lethal is the system that you are working with? Players get attached to their characters. As a GM, I get attached to my players' characters too. Many systems are not very attached to your players' characters, and may kill them off at a moment's notice. And there's only so much that a GM can do without compromising the system itself. Call of Cthulhu is a very good example of basically a system that is built on your players' characters dying a lot. Dread is a system where basically you expect at least one player to die in any given session of the game. So that's something you want to keep in mind. Not only are your players going to be okay with their characters dying sometimes, or more than sometimes, maybe a lot of times, but can you handle it as a GM? The first few times you kill a character as a GM can be kind of rough, especially if you really didn't mean for that to happen. But at the same time, if a system is highly lethal, then you're less likely to feel bad about accidentally killing your players. Just definitely a factor to keep in mind, especially if your players get very attached to their characters. How long is this system meant to be played? Not just in terms of how long are your sessions, but are you working more with one-shots, or are you working more with something closer on the scale of a multi-year campaign? As a subset of this, how long is combat going to take in this game? If you're going to be doing combat a bunch, is this going to be a potential slog like 4th edition D&D was? Or is this going to be something quick and snappy closer to Fate? So, there's a lot of different aspects to look at here. How long sessions are is often something that many systems don't care so much about. Dungeons & Dragons is an example of a system that does not care about how long your sessions are unless you get caught in combat, and then the game really wants you to get to the end of combat before the session is over. But you can easily play like 30 minutes to an hour of D&D, assuming that everybody's schedules are cool with that interruption. A system such as Edge of the Empire has things that happen at the beginning of every session. The game really divides it up into mini episodes functionally. Each session is an episode of your adventure. At the beginning of each episode, you are getting your force points set up, which is a resource that you and the DM spend back and forth. And also the DM rolls obligation to see if anything that you put in your backstory comes up to haunt you in this episode. And then finally, some systems just really, really like having long campaigns, and others hate it with a passion. As I mentioned, Dread is a system where usually about one character will die per session. And also it's really intended for one-shots. You can make a longer campaign with Dread, but it's really not designed for that. How flexible is the setting that you're looking at? Rulebooks often come not only with a set of rules for how to play the game, but also an entire setting for where you play the game in. Shadowrun is a wonderful example where the mechanics involve hacking and gunplay and magic, both arcane and based in shaman rituals. And all of this makes the entire mechanics of Shadowrun lead back to the Shadowrun universe, and it really doesn't work in another setting so well. However, there are some systems that are definitely intended to be more flexible. Dungeons & Dragons is pretty flexible and can work in basically any fantasy setting, whereas something like GURPS is the mother of all systems that do not care about your setting. GURPS is designed entirely to be 100% setting agnostic, and that's something that you might want, especially if you have a very unique setting. If you really want to be in a high school, or if you really want to be in as a bunch of World War II fighter pilots who are also velociraptors, maybe you want GURPS instead of Dungeons & Dragons or Shadowrun. What third-party content is available for your system? If you're looking at a system and there's a bunch of third-party content, that's a good sign, because that means that the community for this system is, or at least was, very active. There's probably going to be a lot of resources to pull from for GMs in this system. Keep in mind that third-party content does have a reputation for players bringing weird things into the game, but that's also something that means that you have more options as a GM. Obviously, good PCs will always ask before bringing third-party content in, but it is something that does happen. The things that GMs get for having third-party content is not only the same things that PCs get. Players will obviously get lots of other options for character creation if there's third-party content to pull from, and GMs can use that as well. But something GM might appreciate more is third-party modules. Free and cheap modules for running entire sessions that are pre-baked can be amazing, and if you purchase a cheap module from somebody who created it, they will be ecstatic. They'll be happy to have made money off of the effort that they put in. Now, having a lot of third-party content does mean that players are going to bring potentially weird and unexpected content to the table. I know that I've personally had a player come up to me during character creation and say, "Hey, I found this Pathfinder module to let me play a dragon." Then I had to say, "No, we're playing level 1. I think a dragon would be a little disruptive." He was very polite about it, but that sort of stuff does happen if there is third-party content available for your system, so it is something to consider. So those are all the main topics that I want you to think about when you're looking at a new system and considering whether that new system is right for you. But ultimately, the best thing that you can do is research. You don't need to answer exactly these questions, keep them in mind, but really just ask around, Google around, ask your friends, ask the internet. The internet sometimes has good ideas, who knows. The important thing is that you find something that's engaging to you, that's interesting to you, and you dive in. And you'll find out very quickly whether this system is interesting to you, and if you keep the topics in mind that I brought up earlier, you'll be able to quickly find out if this is going to be something that works for your campaign or one-shot. Thank you for tuning in. I will see you next lecture.